This is the ICRS Net Zero and Climate Change panel session, part of the ICRS Exchange 2021 Owning the Table. We've got a great lineup of panelists today. So this is a panel session. I'll do the way I'm going to structure this is we'll do a quick round of introductions because I think people always introduce themselves much better than I can introduce them. And then I'll just do a little bit of scene setting on net zero, probably using COP26 as a sort of a bit of a structure for that, as that's been a big driver for change over the past couple of weeks. And then we'll move into the discussion. And I've got some questions, but we'll probably keep it quite dynamic, and that's about 30 minutes. And then we're going to open up to Q&A to you guys in the audience. So feel free to put any questions you think of in that Q&A box in the meantime, and then at the end we can either read those out or you can pop your camera on and ask directly. So you're joined by myself. So my name is Robbie Epsom. I'm the EMEA head of ESG at CBRE Investment Management. I'm also a board director for ICRS. So I'm here today as your board moderator for this session. In terms of our panelists, we've got Jono Ayton from Wilmot Dixon, Jennifer Decker from QSA Partners, and Martin Turner from the Woodland Trust. So if I can just turn in that order to you guys to introduce yourselves, and then I'll do a little bit of scene setting before we dive into the discussion.
Thanks, Robbie. I'll kick off then. So I'm Jono Ayton. I'm a senior sustainable development manager with Wilmot Dixon. I'm heavily involved with the launch of our new sustainability strategy, which is called Now or Never, which outlines our sort of net zero, or as we're calling it, zero carbon aims to 2030. And I lead on sort of all things carbon, waste, energy, biodiversity, etc. So a lot of what we're talking about at the moment and today is all heavily involved, aligned with what's coming out of COP26 as well. So it's great to sort of talk about that, get all your views on it. And as ever, collaboration is the word. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer.
Jennifer Decker, so I'm a partner at QSA Partners. We are a small, nimble consultancy. We're a B Corp, which means we balance profit with purpose. And really what we do is we specialise in helping clients identify, deliver and implement circular business models and sustainability strategies, which of course includes moving towards net zero.
Thanks. And then Martin.
Martin Turner from the Woodland Trust. So we're the UK's leading UK woodland conservation charity, complete not-for-profit business. We have three core purposes. The reason that the trust existed in the first place was to protect the rest of the UK's ancient woodland. And there's only 2% of the UK's geography now covered in ancient woodland. To restore damaged ancient woodland, and finally to create new woodland as well. And most of the new woodland creation projects that we do, we register under the Woodland Carbon Code. And although the trees don't know it, they sequester carbon as they grow. And neither the trees know whether they've got a certificate or not, which can be quite important for the rest of the discussion this afternoon.
Brilliant, thanks. And I think it's a very nice and balanced panel in terms of the net zero topic. So we've got me from the finance sector, that 130 trillion that was promised. I think Jennifer, you had that circular economy piece, which is a key thing when it comes to net zero and closing that loop. And I think Martin, like you said on the Woodland Trust side, it's going to be a key part of that removal offsetting piece, and that the whole conversation around rewilding. Then finally, Jono from the built environment had its own day at COP26 this year. So a big topic, around 40% of global emissions, if not more, if you include infrastructure. So hopefully we've got quite a nice sort of small session. So feel free to jump in with questions at the end, and like I said, pop them in the Q&A as we go. Just in terms of a little bit of scene setting, so I'll try and keep it to under 5 minutes, because I think key to hear from the panelists. Then when we open up to the discussion, whilst I've got some questions I want to ask, very happy for the panelists to ask questions across and to each other, so we can have a sort of dynamic discussion. So I think just in terms of net zero and climate change, what a year 2021 has been. We saw ESG accelerate in 2019, pick up pace, surprisingly as COVID hit, and particularly, my view is COVID showed us the scale of that environmental challenge, particularly when it came to greenhouse gas emissions and net zero. When we saw the global economy shut down for best part of a quarter of the year, and still we only achieved around an 8 to 9% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is roughly what we have to do every year for the next decade if we're going to keep on that sort of 1.5 trajectory. So COVID really kind of kept things moving, and 2021 has just been unprecedented. COP26 has really acted as a sort of marker in the sand at the end of the year for things, and we've seen the Science Based Targets Initiative launch its net zero criteria in the weeks running up to COP. We saw mandatory transition plans come out of COP26, and almost unexpectedly, at least in the public domain, was the Glasgow Pact, which has been a very strong signal to business that countries are starting to align on this. Nearly 200 countries signing up to that Glasgow Pact. And for those, I was lucky to be up at COP in terms of being in the blue zone representing West London business. And the thing which I really saw, which was different to previous COPs, was that business turned up. The real economy actually showed up to COP this year. And that's been one of the real changes. So despite a lot of the negativity I think we've heard in the media, and it'd be really interesting to hear the panelists' perspectives on this as well, business has sent a very strong signal that they are starting to listen on this, and they really did show up. And you saw both the private sector, but the finance sector were really there in force, spotlighting kind of real solutions. And there's even rumours that the UK might be bringing its net zero plans forwards to 2045, but yet to be confirmed. But I think with ICRS, the key thing here is that we are part of that business community. So business turned up at COP. Glasgow Pact has sent a strong signal that this is where things are going, and business likes to get ahead of policy. Policy sets the guide rails in terms of those carrot and stick, which gives business that sort of direction to follow, but business likes to move ahead of that. So all of us here today in the audience on the panel, it's our corporations that are these global entities that transcend borders in a way that politics can't. And we've got a huge opportunity, I think, to really take net zero to that next level. So it'd be really interesting to hear what the panelists make of everything that's happened in this very busy year around net zero and climate change in particular, and kind of what the next steps are. So if I open it up to discussion, and I think throwing this out there as an open question, what are your immediate takes? And happy to go around to all three panelists in terms of where we are right now. Do you see, has this been a positive year? What are the key messages you've taken home from your various perspectives? What are you seeing in the market? Just maybe a couple of minutes each on your perspective on net zero and climate change, starting with maybe Martin, if that's okay, in reverse order to the introductions.
So the world and the attention on this subject has changed dramatically over the last 12 months. And I think for us, one of the things, particularly as a UK-based organisation, that is if you're locked down and you can't do anything and you get an hour's exercise a day, people get out into nature. And I think the value of nature has massively hit home to everybody. And I think that's the raised consciousness amongst individuals, businesses, governments alike, that how important nature is, and it is going to be one of the keys to climate change. The 2050 net zero target announced a couple of years ago by UK government sparked a trickle of interest from business, and then over the last year or so an absolute boom and explosion, and we at the Woodland Trust welcome that with open arms. I think there is a danger of the whole conversation around net zero moving away from what it actually means. I think we need to measure and do the things that are important, and those are things that are going to move the dial to 1.5 degrees. And I think we are in danger of making the things that we're measuring and doing important rather than the other way around. Net zero and the definitions of it can be a little bit troubling, and on paper you can achieve net zero while still pouring out millions of tons of emissions if you buy the right carbon credits, and I think that's a very worrying trend. Reduction has to be a key to this. Developing technologies will be a key to it. We do see some organisations talking about relying on technology, but the technology isn't there yet, and that's going to take time. And one thing that the planet doesn't have is time. And I can only echo some of the comments from the opening address that there's lots of commitments, but commitments are one thing. There is no compulsion to reach any of the targets that have been set. So that's going to take action, and it's action that we really need. We unfortunately saw China and India pressing the reverse button on coal at the very last minute. And I think, having worked in the private sector for too many years to remember, and now being in an NGO, not-for-profit organisation, and looking at what governments say and what governments do, and what businesses say and what businesses can do, is that we are going to have to see business holding governments to account here. Businesses can act, and businesses can act quickly. Governments can act and tend to act quite slowly. And we really want to get behind business as much as possible in all the work that we can do to help deliver strategies, and let businesses show that they can hold officials to account. And we need to get this stuff done, and we need to get it done yesterday.
Yeah, agreed. It's a difficult time frame, political cycles with 9 years to go to the end of this critical decade. It's almost not the sort of the time frame that governments are used to working within. So yeah, I think you're completely right. Businesses have to send that strong message through action. And Jennifer, maybe from your perspective, because I think circular economy is a key part of your focus. Do you feel the circular economy was covered well enough at COP26? It's such a key part of net zero. Do you see that as having had enough attention? And are there any other key things that you picked up from COP26 and just across 2021 in general, I guess, around net zero?
I think, echoing a lot of what Martin said, one of the things, the main thing taken away from COP is what you've addressed at the beginning as well, Robbie, is a bit, businesses can't wait on government to take action. And I think the challenge for us all as businesses and as a consultant helping businesses is, well, how do you do that? And back to that point about it is quite complex, and there is a lot of technical and there's a lot of jargon, but actually you just have to start somewhere. And talking about that proportionality, about the 80-20 rule, you don't have to do everything straight away. Where are your impacts and where can you make a difference? And back, probably chiming particularly with you, Robbie, is well, where does the investment sit and what can I afford and what's the payback? And I think for circularity, there are some sectors who are charging ahead versus others. And it'll be interesting to see what Jono has to say, particularly in construction. I have a construction background, and particularly in construction, I don't think it's moved as fast as things like consumer products. I've worked quite extensively in textiles. There was a lot of representation at COP from different businesses, NGOs, and influencers on moving to a more circular model, which is, I would say, slightly more easy. I don't know if it is easy, but can you move into being more circular in the materials? And actually in the press, this morning, if any of you saw it, and last night, Marks and Spencers are now moving to a higher model, for clothing, and that's quite a big step for a mainstream retailer. So the main challenge with circularity is always getting it from the niche to mainstream. So we are starting to see that now. So really it's about building on that, but again, about proportionality. Where are your impacts? If you work with a big infrastructure client where their main impact's the amount of power they use, then that's where the focus should be, is helping them reduce the amount of power they use, and then looking at offsetting. And the other thing I'm going to say is that I'm actually in Glasgow. I'm a bit late to the party. I only came the other day. I'm going to have to put the light on because the sun's gone away. So excuse me.
Amazing, brilliant, thank you. No, I think the circular economy has a huge part to play, and it's it is great. I think the servitization model of to hear companies like M&S starting to shift that way. Construction sector is really key, like you say. You're starting to see the leasing of fit out things like suspended ceilings, carpet tiles, and it's giving those businesses more control of those embodied emissions when it comes to the GHG net zero agenda. So really interesting to see. I mean, that's a good sort of transition to Jono then on built environments, and 40% or thereabouts of global GHGs come from the built environment, more if you include infrastructure. It had its own day at COP26, which I think is the first time it's had that sort of focus. Do do you think, what are your kind of takeaways from the year and following COP?
It's a good one, isn't it? Yeah, reiterating that 40% figure is a huge one. And I was Googling a couple of days ago and listening keenly on that built environment day, and trying not to be too pessimistic, I guess. But I'm not. What's changed, I guess, as COP as a whole is kind of, I don't think much for me has really changed. A lot has been reinforced, but we set the target back in Paris. We knew what we needed to do. We've been told repeatedly what has to be done. It's now a case of, like Martin was saying, of just doing it. I think there's a lot of we work closely with UK GBC and the World Green Building Council, and they launched sort of the Race to Zero and their climate action plan. And I think that's key for sort of back to that accountability piece of holding companies now to account. The government and the countries have set out their agenda. Whether I agree with it's right or not doesn't matter. It's up to the companies now to really strive and lead those policies and develop them. So I know that we're working closely with the Climate Group, which some of you might be familiar, and they have sort of 3 campaigns and strategies which focus on transport, offices and buildings, and renewable energy. So companies all signing up to those are all good steps. Then you bring in the science-based targets. You bring in I know there's nothing mandatory yet for companies to set science-based targets, but if we can get to that position where everyone is setting net zero, would be great. Wilmot Dixon's obviously we're doing zero carbon by 2030 without offsetting, because that for us is that's the key thing. Like Martin was saying, we can't be affording the carbon offsets, but whilst pumping out fuel. So I think sort of summing up maybe some of the bits of COP for me are sort of it's great that they've addressed methane, for example. That 30% reduction is huge. Methane is a potent gas, but it doesn't last that long in the atmosphere, so we do need to deal with carbon. But it's great that that's happened. And getting all the countries to reinforce their their NDCs, nationally determined contributions. But again, they all came up with those back in 2015. But it's just the reinforcement and it's the message. But I think the sad things to me was, as Martin was saying, the coal was watered down. The transport was, a lot of the major car companies and countries haven't signed up to their cars being phasing out fossil fuels. And I think it's great because it's in the media and it's all around the news now. But I am slightly worried by what I'm calling the greenwashing and the kind of just the confusion behind what net zero actually really means. I googled about an hour ago. I typed in net zero carbon. And hopefully no one of the calls from Shell. But Shell was the first company that appeared with their net zero target. And it made me chuckle slightly, because if you look at that, and I don't mean to pick on Shell, but they've launched their carbon emissions target at 50% by 2030. But when you go and look at the small print, it's only their scope 1 and 2. Actually, 90% of their emissions comes from the fuel in their scope 3 that you and I go and buy from the supermarket. So there's a lot of, everything's in the news at the moment, and it's a big deal. But we've just got to be really clear about, transparency and accountability about what is it actually we're doing, how are we holding people account, and people have got to be reading the right news and going away and doing the right thing. So the environment, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done, and I think it's now we've realised it's collaboration of companies signing up to these agreements to hold us all to account, and that's where I want to see the next 2-3 years really some real progress being made, especially in the built environment sector.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of just that, isn't it? In terms of the outcome, it's it wasn't enough. The Glasgow Pact could have gone further. It was knocked back a bit, but I think what it has done is it's, at least at the business level, it's been a very strong signal that look, nearly 200 countries have signed up to this. This is the direction of travel now, and it's only going to be another step next year, another step the year after. And for business, it's kind of we need to start to really get a hold of this. And I think for any businesses or executives wherever they are in the world who were sort of falling a bit behind or weren't quite believing that the world was moving quite in line with maybe how Europe has been over the past 5 years, that kind of uncertainty is now starting to be taken away. So hopefully it has sent a strong signal to business. But I think the other thing is it's sent a strong signal to consumers and your kind of everyday people on the other side, because it was the first COP that has really, and the build-up's been a big part of this, that's put that net zero GHG language, in the sort of homes of people that aren't in the sector. And they might not fully get what net zero means, but that's almost okay. But they're talking about it and they're challenging it. And I think my hope, and it'd be interesting to hear what the panel thinks, is that the net zero criteria that Science Based Target Initiative brought out in the run up to COP should hopefully go a long way to cutting through a lot of that greenwashing, because it has provided within that some very clear definitions on the near and long-term targets, and obviously the the way that offsets can be used in terms of removal offsets for that sort of residual GHGs at the end, and obviously avoidance in terms of compensation and to balance the books effectively on the way. So hopefully that helps. I mean, what are your views as a group? Do you see that as being the thing that the world's been waiting for when it comes to net zero transparency, and will that help move things to the next level?
I think it's really helpful, and it's a great start. And as you say, the roadmap's there. We've put the checkered flag destination into the sat nav. We need to get in the car and start driving the car. That's the key to it. And I still say that some of the definitions around net zero are a little bit troubling. There might be a tendency to try and buy a way out of this. I just continue to reiterate that to get to net zero, action needs to be things that are going to move the dial to that 1.5 degrees. And there's loads of carbon offsets out there, and they're all legitimate, and I wouldn't criticise anybody for using them, but I would really urge people, the experts that are in the audience today that are thinking about net zero is what we do after emissions to address the unavoidables going to do anything that moves the dial forwards to 1.5 degrees. As a woodland conservation charity, the Woodland Trust will stand on the highest platform and applaud anything that says that we've got to protect the world's forests. Absolutely. Protecting the world's forests maintains the status quo. It stops us going backwards. It doesn't move us forwards. So we need to do more stuff to get emissions out of the atmosphere. And planting trees is never going to be the only solution to that. The Woodland Trust would never say that. But what the Climate Change Committee has said is to get the UK to net zero, 1.5 billion trees have to be planted as part of the solution. That's 150 football pitches a day, folks. And it's about 30,000 hectares a year by 2025. Last year, we planted 13,400 hectares in the UK. So we might have got in the car, but we're still reversing out of the parking space, if you like. We're just not moving forward. And that woodland creation is going to be, according to the Climate Change Committee, vital to hit UK net zero. And I was surprised, even working for the Woodland Trust, to see that last month the Natural History Museum said that the UK is the most nature depleted, in the bottom 10% of nature depleted countries in the world, and the bottom of the G7 nations. And obviously the woodland creation can help to reverse that as well. So I just urge everybody to really think about, reducing as much as possible. What are the unavoidables, and what do we do about the unavoidables that moves that dial forwards to 1.5 degrees?
Yeah, completely agree. And for anyone who hasn't looked at the detail of the new net zero criteria, there is a good steer on that. So for your sector specific, you're given effectively a percentage on what is feasible to abate or reduce for your sector, and that really gives us that steer, like Martin's saying, of how you stay on that 1.5 trajectory until it is no longer feasible for your sector. And then it comes to Martin's point on what do we do about that residual GHG, and that's what we're hoping is Article 6 will start to provide a bit of clarity on the Paris Agreement going forwards, biological direct air carbon capture. But just opening up and being the ICRS skills and getting people into sustainability is a big part of what we stand for here. So what are the skills and the sort of kind of future behaviours that we need to be looking to encourage and nurture to get to net zero, and and not just net zero in terms of mitigation, but also adaptation and sort of resilience? What sort of new jobs, what would be the advice you guys would give people who are looking to get into certain degrees or doing their degrees and about to get into the working world? Where are the gaps at the moment?
Do you want to go, Jennifer, or me?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the particularly for the members, is that it's such a broad topic. You know, if you're talking about trees through to targets, that requires such a vast level of skill. So particularly on, as we're moving forward, we want to make sure we've got measuring and reporting and being robust. So there's a lot of data skills in there, and then science skills. And I think it's, how do you, as an individual, there's probably part of it that I think is about this anxiety people could have about having to know everything. And so as well as having that technical knowledge, you don't need to know everything, but you have to have the skill to be brave, to say, actually, the bits that I don't know, I can go out and find people that can help me with that. So whether that's within your organisation or whether you buy that in. So I think there's, you know, there is some work underway at the moment. I'm working with some of the others from ICRS on the sustainability apprenticeships. And it just does highlight how vast and broad it is, but you don't have to be all things to all people.
Yeah. And Jono, you look like you were going to jump in with something.
No, I was just agreeing with that and thinking back to my time when I first started and my advice, but where companies are going now. And linking back to the original point is, I think we're working towards this point where all companies should now be working towards science-based targets or equivalent. So if you haven't set a sustainability or a net zero or whatever it is strategy, that's the first step. And then in doing that, you've got to be understanding your business model, regardless of what level you are at within your business. There's always something to add to a sustainability agenda, whether it's the data behind the carbon reporting, understanding the greenhouse gases, or whether it's devising the strategy. So when I spent sort of 2 years working with our team to think, right, where does Wilmot Dixon need to be by 2030? What does the world require of us? And hence we set our targets in accordance with science-based targets and with what the world is telling us. And then sort of as you pull apart that sort of knowledge, it's thinking, okay, who are the influencers in our business? Who are the decision makers? How do you tailor your approach and what you're doing and the data you're presenting, so that they can really get behind it and engage with it? And I think that's the kind of core thing about what we're looking at now is we've been told what we need to do. It's about exactly how you do it. And so regardless of what level of seniority or knowledge you've got, is you can pick apart your business strategy and just ask the questions of the people in charge. Do we have a carbon footprint? Do we have a target? If not, why not? Are you addressing waste? Are you addressing biodiversity? And all these questions, they all link to climate change in some way or another, where it's the circular economy, where it's the biodiversity, etc. It all links in. So there is something for everyone to get involved with. And kind of linking to what Jennifer was saying, I think people at the start, it's like, don't be afraid just to get stuck in. They often, I was really pleased to see the COP using, I think it's Voltaire's phrase of, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We don't have to come up with these worldwide amazing scientific strategies. It's just sometimes just literally just doing the basics and you'll get there.
It's about getting started, isn't it? And I think, like you've all said so far, there's a lot of nervousness in the market, isn't there, because of this sort of ambiguity of some of these definitions and the pushback from activist communities. And it's almost, I feel that we're moving into a slightly different phase now, where it is okay to just get started and be transparent. That's the key thing. Be transparent about the assumptions and own mistakes if they're made and correct them as part of that planning. But it's a tough one. I think we're all on a journey. I hate to use that word, but it is where we are, and we're not going to be perfect. But like you say, good is moving us forwards. How about from Martin, from your perspective on the sort of skills and training side? With rewilding being kind of one of the biggest hot topics for the future, where should people be looking?
Yeah, so let's not forget that nature's part of science. And I would urge anybody that's a budding ecologist, or anyone that's going to be studying biodiversity, and vice versa. If you're studying to be an ecologist, that doesn't stop you moving into business. And if you're a business, it doesn't stop you employing an ecologist, for example. And I think Jono will probably know, in the building sector, there's loads of organisations that are looking forward at biodiversity net gain, for example. The expertise doesn't lie in the built sector, it lies in different sectors. So, there should be growing opportunities in business to help advise and support strategies such as future biodiversity net gain when implemented by UK government. So it's really thinking about how nature-based solutions can join up with science-based target initiatives and bring the whole piece together to get to the result that we need to get to. So business, don't forget nature, and tree huggers like me, don't forget business. It's collaborative. This is all about collaboration and working together. We're all looking to achieve the same thing, and it's going to take a raft of expertise, background and knowledge to get there, and working together to get there.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's amazing how much things have changed. You know, I'm a chemical engineer by background, and here I am sat in a finance investment management firm with a team of scientists and engineers. You know, the world has completely shifted, and like you say, Martin, you know, it's you can have ecologists going into any corner of the economy now, because those skill sets are needed everywhere. And arguably, I guess, flipping it completely the other way, almost every job, all the legacy careers, you know, all the legacy sort of skills and professions almost need to have sustainability built into them at university sort of stage as well, so that we're ingraining that thinking into all the kind of legacy businesses that already exist. But it's just got to be everywhere. It's collaborative and across the board. So just looking to the future, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear what you three think of the kind of future trends around net zero, climate change. You know, where are we going to next? So COP26 has been that big sort of moment post Paris. What comes next? And you know, maybe if I kick the conversation off with one thing which I'm struggling to sort of chew over in my head, and I think Martin, you might be able to add to it, but I think the others will have a view on it too. Is what do we do with that residual? You know, particularly Jono and Jennifer, you'll know this obviously from the circular economy and the built environment space. You know, we're going to be left in our sectors with, you know, large amounts of embodied carbon in our scope 3 GHG emissions. You know, maybe eventually that will get mopped up as the economy starts to move, but definitely in the short term, that's going to be where our sort of bulk of our residual emissions are. So we're going to have to look to do something about that as we transition to net zero. Is it okay to be investing in rewilding? Does that count? Do we look at direct air carbon capture? You know, what does the future bring as we all move that way? And what other trends and next steps do you all see? Anyone want to jump in first on that massive?
I don't mind talking a little bit about circularity. I think on circularity, you know, it has to be proposition led, because you could, you know, take circularity and apply it, but if you don't have a customer, then you've not solved any kind of problems, you know. So whether it is taking recycled materials or reused materials, but if there isn't a market, isn't a customer, you've not really, you've probably just created another form of waste. So that's sort of thinking very much about being proposition led and having that at the forefront of developing a model, which possibly people don't think that. People come from, oh, I've got this thing, I've got this product, but actually, is there a market for it? And then that chimes back in with the whole investment piece. You know, how are you going to address this? How are you going to fund it and capitalise it? So there's really something very much about putting that proposition and customer at the heart for the future, so that we don't just end up creating more waste or using virgin materials to no end. So I think that is really very important in circularity.
I think it was great to see recently in the news, I don't know if some of you picked up on the Tulip building in London. So the plans for this new fancy building, I don't know if there's an office or commercial space, what it was, really kind of fancy. It looks like it belongs in kind of Saudi Arabia, one of those buildings. And it got declined by the mayor due to the high embodied carbon emissions associated with it. So I think this is great because it's now in the news. You know, we're not just building buildings for the sake of building buildings. You know, we're really thinking about what's going into these buildings, what the materials are, where they're coming from, and the real embodied carbon content, which is great. I think there's going to be a real, I suspect the 10 years now is going to be really focusing on companies' own emissions, the scope 1, 2, whilst not taking our eye off the scope 3, which is arguably the most important, don't get me wrong. But I think it's putting the plans in place now for all the designs of buildings, speaking from sort of the built environment sector. But as long as you've got the plans in place now to design for deconstruction, is what we're calling it, we'll hopefully reap the benefits from 2030, 2040 onwards. But I think most of the work now is companies getting started. I think I just picked up on someone's comment on the in the chat, which we'll probably pick up in a bit in the question Q&A anyway. But there's a key bit around what we're talking about is everyone needs to get started and the journey's now, etc. But there's that big gap between bigger corporations saying, okay, we've got our targets, and then there's the rest of sort of the UK and the SMEs who, with no disrespect, they probably don't know what a kilowatt or a carbon joule is, whatever it is. And it's how do we support those companies And there's a lot out there that they can use, but equally, there's thousands of SMEs out there who need help, who need to be told how to carbon footprint their business. And equally, that's a resource. That's, an MD's got to go, okay, you're telling me I now need to hire a sustainability professional X amount. I'm on the line of it. I can't afford this. So there's that balance that we've got to think about. And, does that come on to companies like us? For example, we work quite a lot with SMEs and support them. But equally, does every company have the resources to do that? And I think that's going to be a big issue going forward as well that we need to tackle.
I have to, before Martin jumps in, I have to shamefully plug the Mayor of London's Better Futures initiative on exactly that point, because they have been set up to help SMEs understand their carbon footprint and transition to net zero. So I only know about that because I was promoting it on behalf of West London Business. But if anyone has any SMEs that they know are struggling with that transition, that's what the Better Futures initiative is for in London. So that's not UK wide, sadly, but again, it's a start. But Martin, maybe bringing you in on the same point is a lot of people are looking for mopping up their residuals to invest in tree planting. There's a lot of pushback on the fact that private sector is starting to try to buy up land at scale, and that's obviously taking away access to local communities. But there's a lot of good in there because it obviously has social benefits, biodiversity benefits, and can remove carbon. What are your views on where that's going from the Woodland Trust side?
I mean, our position is very, very clear that, again, and I'll reiterate it, trees are not the sole answer to this, never will be. And if we can rapidly, goodness knows how, get investment into how do we develop removal technologies, brilliant. Trees play a part, trees play a big part, trees take a while to do it. We don't deny that either. But the analysis of the schemes that the Woodland Trust has planted under the Woodland Carbon Code, which is the only official carbon scheme in the UK voluntary market, is that in the first 10, 15, 20 years, the emissions impact is relatively low. And then from 30 to 50 years, the trees start to grow rapidly and do 50% of the job. So in terms of getting to a UK 2050 net zero position, if we start planting these trees in the next couple of years, by 2050, the trees will be doing a remarkable job in getting towards that UK 2050 net zero position. And the other benefits are undeniable. I mean, someone's mentioned Sir David Attenborough already. We bow to the godness of Sir David and the programs that he produces. I don't think anybody's under any illusions that globally we're losing nature at a dramatic and absolutely terrifying rate. The climate and nature crises are inextricably linked. You cannot separate them. And one thing that tree planting does, apart from the emissions removal, is provide habitat for nature and biodiversity. It also helps soil retention, it helps air quality, it improves water quality, it provides mitigation from flooding, it provides spaces for people to go and enjoy, it undoubtedly boosts health and well-being. So tree planting, yes, can be part of the solution to getting rid of unavoidable emissions, but the additional benefits that it provides for biodiversity, nature, people, and all the other things that I've mentioned all come with it. The UK's one of the least wooded countries in Europe at 13% tree cover. The rest of the Europe averages over 30%. And we need to get to 19% tree coverage in the UK. We start doing it now, that 2050 target for the UK is achievable.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it may be a strong message to all of us on this session now, in terms of a lot of us are leaving those offsetting discussions till further down the line because we're focusing on reductions in abatement. But if tree planting and rewilding is featuring in those offsetting plans, sounds like we need to be thinking about that sooner for them to actually have a positive effect. So that's really interesting. Conscious of time and keen to move it into the Q&A. So maybe just a quick round, starting with Jennifer, just on any advice that you'd offer the practitioners on the call, those in-house leaders, those sustainability advisors, in light of everything we've learned on sort of net zero and climate in 2021. If you want some time to think about it, happy to jump to others on the call, but
no, I can come back at that, and there are some questions around this. It's just get started. I mean, really, that's it. If you don't start, you're never going to get anywhere. And there is lots of help and advice out there. Tap into people like ICRS and your colleagues and peers. You like I said earlier, you don't have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers from the day one, but just get started. Where are your impacts? Where are the biggest impacts? Apply the 80-20 rule.
And Jono?
Well, there's the interesting comment, and I'm not sure I know the answer, but it's about the fear of getting it wrong, and the fear of sort of, the old classic saying of the worst decision is to make no decision at all, isn't it? To do nothing is the worst. Even if you make the wrong decision, you will learn something from it, and it will either be you've learned that there's a barrier in place, whether that's an MD or a process or whatever it might be. You will learn something from it. So picking up on that Jennifer point is, tailor what you're doing to your audience, understand them. If they don't care about kilowatts, etc., turn it to cost. That's usually what I do when I'm trying to make my business case for things. There is a cost. Sustainability is those three pillars, or the Venn diagram as we were taught as kids. It's economic, sustainable, and social. So if it's costing you and your business more, then it's clearly not sustainable in the long term. So there's that kind of approach that I'd advise you all to tailor when you're trying to present your business case to your boards or your companies. Just get started on it. There's lots of material out there online. Some of it useful, some of it not. I'm sure the ICRS has recommendations of which ones to use. I usually use UK GBC. They're really helpful with a lot of their policies they have. And we've worked quite closely with other companies on that. And equally, you're welcome to look at our strategy. We're quite transparent with what we say. So if you want to see the strategy we've launched and our goals, please go and have a look at the Wilmot Dixon one, because we've been doing it since sort of 2012. And I can tell you, we made a hell of a lot of mistakes. I'm sure we got it quite wrong for a few years with things we did, but we kept learning and we kept trying. And now we're kind of at the forefront of it, but only because we've been there and we've done the sort of hard work, and now can sort of put our hands on our heart, and we know our data. I trust it, I look at it, I understand it, and I know where we're going with it. But that's only because I've been through the pain of it. So obviously learn from others, because it will make a big difference.
Brilliant. And then finally, Martin, just your views before we move into Q&A.
Yeah, I kind of think of it in the context of what drives the Woodland Trust and what drives our tree planting is conservation principles. We don't plant trees for carbon removal, never have, never will do. It's about what's the best result for UK woods and trees, nature, biodiversity and people. And as I said earlier, the trees then absorb emissions without even knowing that they're doing it. So what I would urge businesses to do is think about this as part of their wider strategies. Is the health and well-being, community engagement, staff engagement, what forms part of the overarching strategies, and how can what the Woodland Trust do feed into those things. And if it then involves planting trees, there will be a positive climate outcome as well. So it's about thinking of this in the round rather than just as an isolated thing to look at.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I think we'll open up to Q&A. Feel free to turn your camera and audio on, those in the audience, to ask a question. If not, happy to read them out if you stick them in the Q&A. So if I kick off with one of them first, and if anyone's brave, feel free to put your camera on in the meantime. So one of them was that there wasn't much talk of food production at COP26, and I guess that's probably a loaded comment, given that food is often lauded as being, especially food waste, the third biggest emitter if it were to be a country on Earth. So that's a big area when it comes to GHGs. Do the panelists see the same? Did food not feature heavily enough on the agenda of COP26? Both, I guess, in terms of production and waste.
Yeah, I didn't actually catch much of the food one, if I'm truly honest, but I was just sort of linking it to the bigger picture around where do we go with it. We know it's an issue, and I guess my question back to everyone is is the issue with the consumer or the producer. We are inherently a wasting society with how much we waste. Is that our fault? Is that just the way we are, and will we ever change, or is it up to the sort of manufacturers, the way they produce the food and how much they produce and how it's regulated? We either move towards sort of draconian measures in terms of what we can and can't do because we don't trust the people, because we clearly, we don't make the right decisions, and you see the humongous amounts of food waste that happens. And what kind of role is it for the policies to change that and influence that and maybe incentivize people not to reduce as much, whether that comes through the kind of tax or higher prices, which obviously is not really favourable. So yes, sorry, I didn't probably pick up much from food at COP, and specifically I didn't actually look into it much. I don't know whether the other panelists picked out anything, or whether you know yourself. From.
I can say one thing, if unless any of the other panelists want to jump in, which I think whilst there may not have been a sort of dedicated day on it in that sense, there definitely business were talking about it. I was at an Aldersgate event, which actually Wilmot Dixon, I think, was speaking at as well. And Nestle, were one of the key speakers, and they covered quite heavily their plans around food production and the sort of that, how important that is in terms of their value chain scope 3 emissions. So I think it's definitely featuring. What's quite exciting, I guess, is the fact that a lot of that is driven by consumers, and consumers significantly increased their understanding of all of this in the run-up and during COP. So I think, we will see changes to buying habits, and the food industry is one of those that is a little bit more consumer-facing than some of the other business-to-business sort of outfits out there. I don't know if Jennifer or Martin wanted to add anything. Otherwise, I can pick out another.
Just that I must have a different algorithm on my social media feed. I saw lots of food things, but that could be because I used to work for RAP, so they're always well represented in food. But I couldn't come up with anything other than there was quite a bit of noise around it, but didn't have its official day. Sorry, Martin.
No, I mean I think it is very consumer driven. And I kind of get the impression, and no fossil fuel organisations will be mentioned, but whilst people want it, suppliers will continue to supply it. So you've kind of got to try and change the demand focus here. What's an avocado doing in the UK, you could argue, and what's the carbon footprint of getting an avocado to the UK? But people want to eat avocados. Do we educate people not to eat avocados anymore, or strawberries in December? I don't know. Back in the day that none of us can remember, you ate what was produced here, and that was it. And people tended to survive.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is behaviour change, and that's the exciting bit, isn't it? Individuals can vote with their wallet, but I guess the first bit is that consumer awareness, which companies like Sky, it was great to see at COP, are really starting to use things like behavioural insights and nudge theory to start to push consumers in the right direction, hopefully around things like that. Maybe putting out a more general net zero question from Dominic, and feel free to VC on and add to this, but the question is that isn't one of the sort of major challenges around sort of countries' territorial approaches to net zero. So I guess that's the differences you get across different borders when it comes to net zero policy and targets.
I might go slightly off track here, Dom, but I might bring it back somewhere. But I was at a stag do a couple of weekends ago, and I was sort of driving back with one of my good mates who worked in the oil and gas industry. He then converted, rightly so, after enough peer pressure for me. But we sort of got talking about climate change as one does, and we were sort of talking about how draconian measures might be needed to sort of save the planet. And one of the things we were kind of coming up with was around the role of, I guess, the IPCC, so the Interpanel for Climate Change. That group was set up, obviously, to sort of provide policymakers with scientific advice on climate change, which it has been doing regularly for many years. But actually, the sort of governments and countries that they aren't held to account by anyone, so that they get told what the science is, but nothing really changes. So linking that obviously to that territorial approach, there's no kind of standard for it. There's no one group that says this is what it is and you must obey it. Now, ideally, I'd love to get into that position where you kind of have that group where countries are responsible to them. It doesn't matter what your government is, whether it's blue, red, or green. they actually answer to this sort of supreme group. And so every 2 years, when politicians are trying to win their votes, they just say whatever they're going to say to win their votes. And I know I'm being pessimistic here and with new people, but we have seen it for a number of years, and change isn't happening. So I guess I'm kind of looking for that future piece, I guess, accountability at almost the highest level. Probably moving to sort of comedy piece here, but like the disaster movies, kind of an alien species or comet's going to hit, and sort of the heroes of the earth, whatever it is, come together. To sort of, and that's arguably where we've got to go with climate change. You've got to have this bit. Yes, it might not be 10 days before the world's going to die. It's going to be 10, 20 years. But there's got to be a group which countries are almost accountable to. Otherwise, you'll never see real change get made. I mean, we talk about behaviour change, and yes, we could switch to single-use plastics, earbuds, and all what that is. But none of that is going to really change the whole issue around climate change, where massive kind of draconian measures are really going to need to happen to make real change, and it's going to be painful. There's no doubt about it, and there's going to be a lot of pain along the way, whether we don't get our avocados, or we're entitled to our trips skiing, or whatever it is. There'll be a point where it's going to be it'll be so difficult, but it's going to have to get done.
Yeah, I totally agree on the accountability piece. There was accountability, and I kind of hate to say it, legislation, because sometimes people just won't do it unless they're absolutely made to do it. I hate the thought of that. You would hope that people would see what was happening and just want to do it. But I'm afraid I think I'm a bit cynical and perhaps don't think that will be the case. The WWF did a scorecard for FTSE 100 companies on net zero, which was really quite interesting. And plans, 57% of FTSE 100 companies in October still didn't have a plan for net zero. And when you look at the column for is the leadership team accountable for it, most of the colours are red. So accountability, absolutely. Governments need to be accountable. Something has just got to radically change. We've come away from COP26 going, that was okay. The reversal on coal on the last day went, perhaps not as good as we thought. I think the analysis is that COP26 gets us to 1.8 degrees. And if you're an indigenous island population, that means you're going to lose your house pretty soon.
Yeah. No, it's not enough, which is why I think, as we're all saying, business is going to have to step up. Jennifer, anything you wanted to add on that? Because I'm conscious we're into our last 5 minutes. So
I think,
make this the last question.
I think there's just something else. There's just something else out there about the generational change that's coming through, that some of us that are a bit older and looking possibly a little bit more towards being retired by 2030, how much of a difference do we think that's going to make? We need to, at this end of the generation, look to the people that are coming behind us, and that, I'm not going to call it the Greta effect, but I am going to call it the Greta effect. They have eco-anxiety, and they're going to come into the workplace and come through education with very different ideas from us. So that's not really an answer, but it's a question about how much is that going to help change. There's something around that. I wonder what other people think about that.
And it's an interesting point as well, because I'm looking at a lot of the questions in the chat, and I think we've covered this, so I won't ask them out, but are around that fear of getting it wrong for businesses, and almost not getting started because they're trying to get things to be perfect, kind of to Jono's point, not just going out there with that tech approach of the minimal viable product and iteratively improving year on year. It's, waiting for it to be perfect. So that Greta effect is a double-edged sword in a way, because it drives that sort of change in the sort of real world of consumer behavior, but it also creates some of that fear at the business level of getting it wrong. And that's where I think, to Martin's point earlier, we need to get that collaboration back and get everyone in the same room, trying to move together. I'm sadly going to have to wrap it up because we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. So I think just if I pull the sort of conversation together, I think the key messages I'm hearing from the panel is that whilst the political sphere continues to adjust those global guide rails on sustainability, on ESG, on net zero, the direction of travel is now clear, and from the Glasgow Pact with those 200 odd countries, it seems to be we're getting unanimous agreement in the direction, not necessarily kind of level playing field in terms of the pace. So I think, the call to action for this is that, the time for business change is now, and we all need to go back to our professions and be leaders, whether we're advising or in-house, because we've got 9 years left of this critical decade. And so there's not time to waste. And I think several of the panelists said something to this effect, which is a sort of an adage I quite like, which is if you aim for nothing, you hit nothing. So I think getting those sort of science-based targets in place, even if you don't know how you're going to get there, it's about getting something there, recognizing that that's what needs to be done, and then working with SBTI probably to set those near and long-term targets, and just being transparent and open to that fear of getting it wrong. If you're transparent, open and honest, I don't think stakeholders will criticize too hard, because that's the sort of moving forwards that everyone's looking for. It's iterative improvements, but I think we need to accelerate action is the clear message. So a huge thank you to the three panelists. It's been brilliant to have you all here. It's probably one of the hottest topics at the moment, so I hope we've managed to do it justice in our hours slot. But really big thank you on behalf of myself and ICRS, and to the audience.